Welcome to the Maritime Vision podcast. I'm your host, Paul Wioli. In each episode, we bring you exclusive interviews with maritime professionals, industry experts, and students. Our guests come from different backgrounds, including shipping, yachting, offshore, supply chain, and more. Our goal is to give you all the knowledge you need to succeed in the maritime industry. Hello everyone, welcome back to a new podcast episode. And today in this podcast episode, we are joined by Stefan Holm. Welcome Stefan, it's a pleasure to having you in this podcast episode. Today we are going to talk about EU ETS. And I think you are the right person to talk about it because you are a regulatory expert. So of course you will explain what is your role. So first of all, can you introduce yourself please?
Thanks Paul Louis, and thanks for having me. I was pleasant to have the invite to join your show here. My background is I have a degree from Copenhagen Business School in international business and politics. At my last job, I was at a shipbroking house where I was in the advisory department, where I personally did a lot of advice on the new regulations coming into play. So that's why the regulatory expert were a title given to me here. I just started up my own shop here January 1st, probably January 2nd. January 1st is already a bit hungover, right? I just started up now, and I'll focus on only doing advice on everything that's regulations related in the shipping industry. That's a little bit about me.
So before we start right into the topic, if people have ask any questions about regulatory, how they can contact you?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn, either to me directly or for my company that's called the New Era Maritime Advisory. And I think the New Era part of the name we'll get back to during this session, because I really think that shipping is enduring some changes at this point.
Perfect. Okay, right. So let's start now to talk about ETS regulation. Can you provide an overview about it and what is the goal of this regulation?
Sure. To have the grand scheme overview of the EU ETS and why the shipping industry is being introduced to this now, we need to take back to the Paris Agreement from the COP meeting in 2015. Where most nations in the world agreed on quite ambitious CO2 reduction to be met by 2030. And to do this, they need all sectors to, walk the same path on decarbonization. And even though shipping has been regulated heavily on safety and on operation, shipping have not been very regulated when it comes to emissions and also to taxation. And I think that's mainly down to the international aspect of the industry. So trade between countries, international waters, and the flag of a country can change overnight, right? So all those aspects have been making it difficult for regulators to get shipping to pay for emissions. So they decided in the EU not to wait for the IMO to make some sort of taxation of emissions, and instead of waiting, they decided to incorporate into this ETS. It's short for the Emissions Trading Scheme, and it's actually a system that has been in place since I think it's since 2003 in the EU, but only for power producing or steel producers, so really heavy industry. And they have recently adopted the aviation and now also the shipping industry into this. So what it basically does, and what is the intention of the EU ETS, is to put a price on carbon, quite simply. So it's a market mechanism. You need to buy an allowance in the market to cover a ton of CO2 emissions. So when you buy that one allowance to offset your one ton of emissions, then you actually put a price on what's coming out of the chimney of the vessel. And when you put a price on that, you also incentivize people to go in and invest in some energy efficiency measures. Of course, you already have that incentive in reducing the fuel consumption and the fuel cost of a vessel. But now by putting on the cost of the emissions, you add to that incentive. And then it's actually down to the individual ship owner to decide whether they should, invest in reducing their emissions, or if they should just keep paying for what they're emitting. And the way the ETS is designed is there will be a reducing amount of allowances out there, so the price is going to increase for emitting a ton of CO2 going forward. So in that case, it should become automatically more and more financially viable to invest in reducing your emissions. So that's like the basics of the regulation that they have put, is to put the price on carbon.
Okay, so it's to to make some kind of pressure for shipowner to decarbonize a little progressively their fleet. Okay, so I imagine like it's a progressive regulation, or it's like it will be the same. It won't change for the upcoming years.
So it has like a phase-in this year. So for 2024, it's a 40% of the emissions that is covered under. There's a reporting scheme called EU MRV, where every vessel record their emissions and then send it to a verifier who then verifies the emission. And 40% of those emissions occurring intra-EU trade, and 50% of those 40% is going to or from the EU. It only needs to be covered by allowances. And then next year it's 70%, and in 2026 it will be 100% of emissions, but still only the 50% of intra. No, sorry, I'm going to or from the EU. So in that way it's progressive, but it's mainly thought of as letting people learn how to comply before hitting them with a big bill for the EUAs. So I think this year we will see less people deviating the EU for this because it's a relatively small amount that they have to pay. But then they get used to it, and then next year it increases, and the next year again, then we are at full phase-in. So you have time to adapt.
Okay, interesting. So in terms of the economic landscape, this regulation, what kind of impact it will make in the short, middle, and long term?
So in the short term, I think we will see some non-EU owners and non-EU operators will probably decide not to go to the EU, because you have to do quite a substantial compliance exercise to comply with this regulation. So for one thing, you need to open an account in a national registry. So if I was a Danish ship owner, that would be easy enough. I would know sort of where to go and with the Danish authorities to open up this account, to just being able to receive these allowances, because allowances are only an electronic document. So it's like a closed ecosystem that goes on with only electronic documents here. So you can't print them out and then sell them or send them in the mail. You have to be able to receive them electronically in this registry. That's one thing. But if you were based, let's say, out of China or out of Singapore, then you don't have a national registry to go to. You don't have a national company that you can actually go in, a national state that you can call and ask where to go. So the EU had made this kind of funny arrangement, saying that if you're not registered in Denmark or in the EU, then you have to register at the country where you have had the most port calls in the last 2 years. But then you have the further complexity that's a lot of ship owners do one vessel, one company. So you have like this special purpose vehicle that's just a drawer company for this one ship. It's still operated by the same group, but if you go down to the specific vessel, it's only owned by a company that only owns this vessel and has 0 employees, but is part of a bigger group. But that means that if you have a fleet of, say, 10 vessels, you might risk of having 10 different countries that you have to report to. So the whole compliance exercise in the short run is going to be a nightmare for especially smaller companies. If you're a big company with 500 employees and 200 vessels, this is just going to be something that your legal department or finance department is going to handle, and it's just another task for them. But if you're, let's say, a small family office of 5 to 7 people, you're going to spend a lot of time getting to know where you actually, how to comply with these rules. And you also
Okay.
have to service your contracts to make sure that they are fit for this new world of regulation in the EU. And I think for some from outside the EU, it will just be easier to say, we're not going to bother. We're just going to say in our vessel description that it's not EU fit. So you can have
Okay.
a time charter, but we're not going to call the EU. It's just too much of a hassle.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to say, because you say non-EU fleet, it's quite interesting. It means maybe the regulation, it will make bring more business to the EU companies, because we cannot maybe rely on non-EU ship owners. So maybe companies will just go for EU ship owners, maybe.
Maybe. I think more it will tend that business going to and from the EU will go to the more established companies. So you can still have a company from Singapore or Vietnam or China
Yeah.
or the US, but it just needs to be of a certain size. Otherwise, it's just going to be a hassle dealing with them.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
think sort of a quality improvement of your suppliers in terms of ship owners in the future. And yeah, so that's what I think will be the main main consequence in the short run. In the medium run, we're going to see that people are, adapting to this, and they are planning and they're strategizing around it. So you can actually have, like, as I mentioned before, the economic incentive in reducing CO2 will be bigger. You will also have a bit of a incentive to operationally plan your voyages so that you have the least amount of EU allowances. If you call a port close to the EU but not in the EU, then your inbound leg, or outbound for that matter, will be cheaper if you go, let's say, directly from Rotterdam to Shanghai, as some of the main container liners do, right? So if they can put in a call, let's say in Turkey or in Morocco, then they would, I think, like 80% of their CO2, maybe even 90% of their EUA cost will be reduced. So I think you're going to see some operationally changes happening in the medium run. And then finally, in the long run, I think we're going to see some consolidation. I think some of the smaller, the family offices, they need to either grow or go away, sell off, and maybe move to either smaller ships or separate industries where it's not as complicated. So I
Okay.
think that's like short, medium, and long term consequences.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for this information. So now, if we want to talk more about the ship owner itself, or the shipping companies, what they need to implement to comply with ETS regulation. For example, what kind of what they need to do in the upcoming month, years to comply with it.
Yeah. So the first handing in of the EU allowances to cover your emissions is only going to be in September 25. So they have still close to 21 months to adapt to this. But what they have to do is have a registry account. So they need to be able to receive allowances. They need to be able to verify their emissions. And they need to have a contract stating if it's the cargo owner, if it's the ship owner, depending whether you're doing a time charter or a voyage charter, who is to pay for the emissions, and how are you going to pay via the freight? Are you going to pay via transferring these allowances, or how are you going to deal with this? And then you just need to have your emissions numbers verified at the end of the year. I think it's in March next year that they have to have it verified, and then they still have time to go out and buy. So they also have to have some sort of market access to the EU allowances. But we've seen for, I think, a year ago, there were only very few brokers who were dealing with allowances. Now every medium or large-sized bunker company will also sell you these allowances. I think even the small ones can do it, because it's quite, a derivative of the bunker trade. So they will also easily establish market access and sell them to you. So that's probably the smallest aspect of the one. But having, a transparent view of what you're paying for when you're buying these allowances, how you're allocating them, I think the accounting part of it would also be quite a big headache. Because when you go into this registry account where you can hold these allowances, you just have the number of allowances that's in there. So you would have to have some sort of accounting saying, okay, how much did I pay for them? When did I buy them? To which ship did I allocate them in the beginning? Or you should just, get an average price at the end of the year. but that means that you can't really close the P&L, like the actual economics of an individual voyage before the end of the year, because that's only when you know your average cost. So I think that model will not work for bigger companies, because they need to know exactly from this voyage what's my EUA cost. I cannot wait 9-12 months to get that number.
Okay. So we talk a lot about the ship owner perspective because, of course, they have big implication with this new regulation. But what about shipbuilder? Because they build the ships, so they are kind of concerned about it. On other, of course, we have other stakeholders as well who can be very concerned about it.
I think for the shipbuilders, the EU ETS is probably the least of their worries. You have another regulation in the horizon next year called the Fuel EU Maritime. So that's not what we're talking about today, but that is in place to secure the uptake of new types of fuel, and that will require engine rebuilds or engine modifications to be able to deal with these. So I think that's more of their worries, not so much the ETS, because that's just paying for the emissions. You don't need any technical aspects modified.
Okay, very interesting. On to verify the emission of a ship, or I won't go into the technical aspect of it, but do we need to call like a specific, what can I say, qualified company to make it, or we can?
You have with the EU registered a few third-party verifiers. That's mainly their class. So the classes are the ones right now giving you the document of compliance. And to get your document of compliance, you need to have an approved EU MRV report if your vessel is above 5,000 GT. So they will also be able to do these verification of emissions going forward. But I think we will see more maybe software companies or having on-demand verifying of emissions been done automatically. I think we will see more and more companies trying to go into that area. And I know already that a few of these, performance tracking companies, CII improvement companies, it could be Zero North or similar. They have established some sort of a calculation that will be able to confirm the emissions when you need to confirm them by the end of a voyage, for instance.
Okay, interesting. But now let's talk about the challenges concern we have for those stakeholders, because they will have to adapt to this ETS regulation. You say in September 2025. What are right now the issue you can see with your clients, or they always ask you, they're always afraid of about this regulation?
Right now we're seeing quite a few different approaches to tackling this. Some say, I just want to know what the freight is, and it's the ship owner who will have to surrender these allowances in September next year. It's not me as a cargo owner, it's not me as a charter, it's the ship owner. I will have to pay for it, but I will pay for it by the freight. I don't want to, disrupt my business by taking all these new factors in before I can do a contract with the ship owner. And then you have other parts saying, okay, I want to know exactly how much I'm paying for emissions, because then I actually know what my scope 3 emissions are. And I think you will have more and more in the last category going forward, because you also have some other new EU regulation called the CSRD. That's a reporting directive on sustainability. And that's, formalizing what parameters within scope 1, 2, and 3 you have to report on when you're a bigger company. And these cargo owners using these big ships, they're all big companies. So most of them will have to report on all their emissions on all these scopes. And then here, shipping is just a big part of their scope 3 emissions. So they will have, as a stakeholder, they will have an interest in knowing what the emissions are. And they will probably take a lot more ownership of what is actually being emitted when I transport my cargo from A to B. And I could easily imagine seeing some of them giving maybe an emissions budget for a vessel, saying, okay, I want to have transported, I can pay you this, but with that, you are also only allowed to emit, let's say, 1,000 tons of CO2 during the transportation. If you emit more, then you have to pay for it yourself. That's also improving their scope 3 emissions, and that will easily, attract the most efficient vessels to these kind of cargoes because they will have an advantage. So you will have some of the stakeholders from outside the industry actually using this of a way to reduce their scope 3 emissions. It's a little bit of an exercise, a little bit of a stretch to see it directly as that, but it's definitely a lever that they can pull for reducing their scope 3, and it's part of a bigger context from all the regulations that's coming out from the EU at the moment.
Okay, very interesting. Now I want to ask you something. This question, always have this question, and I think you are the right person to answer to it. So in the shipping industry, we have the shipowner, we have the shipbroker, we have the charter company. But sometimes we have a big issue to say who is paying for this ETS regulation. Sometimes it can just stop the deal on being quite a big concern for all those stakeholders. So can you maybe clarify this situation?
Sure. Actually, there was an amendment to the ETS rules just a few months before entering into force, where it stated that a ship owner would be able to reclaim and be reimbursed by the party who had navigational control of the vessel. And here the navigational control is quite important, because that means that if your vessel is out on a time charter, taking orders from an operator, then they are required to pay for your EU ETS cost and the cost of EUAs. And then you can agree, should they transfer them or should they pay for you for that monetarily. But if you're an owner and you're active in the market yourself, so you're doing voyage charters, picking up cargoes here and taking them to there, then it's yourself as a ship owner who's deciding on the speed and the direction, and you're ordering the fuel for the vessel, all that. So you still have the navigation control, then you have to pay for it yourself. Then they just have to make sure to get that reclaimed from the freight that they are getting, or if they agree something different with the cargo, like the example I just gave before. So if you're operating your own vessel, meaning that you don't have it on time charter, that will actually be very similar to just calculating what's the bunker cost. And since the emissions is a direct consequence of consuming bunker, that's actually quite easy for them to adapt to that if they're doing it. It's just an add-on on the fuel. So they should actually just calculate a higher cost of the fuel than before.
Okay.
And then they of course have all the compliance hassle afterwards. But I mean, just dealing, calculating, adapting, it's just to increase the cost of your fuel.
Okay. So now if I give you, for example, an example quite classic. Okay, I'm a competitive broker, and I will make a deal with a ship owner on the charter company, get the cargo. But the ship owner come to me and said, "Oh, I don't want to comply with this regulation. You should take all the measures about it." And I'm a broker. I say, "No, it's not working like that." What is in this scenario the best approach?
So it will always be the ship owner who will have to submit and surrender the EU allowances. So they will have to do it regardless. You can't transfer the responsibility to someone else. So if they don't want to deal with it, then they should just not go for a cargo going to and from the EU. And that leads me to back to where I started saying that in the short term, you might see somebody declining to call the EU. And that would be an example for that. So for a competitive broker, you would probably need to make sure that your clients are well aware how they comply and that they are ready to deal with it. And if not, you should probably hold their hands a little bit, helping them through this startup phase.
Okay, quite interesting. Thank you for that. Do we have this regulation only in Europe, or some other continent try to have the same kind of system?
I know that the UK is gonna do their own system at one point, and I think also the US had a proposal in Congress in the beginning of the year, but that's being postponed until after their election. And I also think that China would be doing something similar. But between that was announced and now, then we had the IMO meeting this summer, where the IMO agreed that there will be some sort of greenhouse gas pricing that should apply globally. And for if that comes into force before that, then I think we will see a combination of the system and just putting it into one. Because if you have an individual system for China, one for US, one for EU, and also the IMO, then it's just going to be a nightmare to do international trade. So I think they're going to combine it within the IMO. There is a little but to that, because this being decided by politicians, with the EU, they will see some revenue from the maritime industry coming up as a consequence from the EU ETS. And I personally think it's hard to see that they would let go of this revenue that's coming into the EU, just because the IMO is doing something similar, that they would then just discard the system. And they have also put in the actual regulation, if you read it, all the 120 pages, there's like a small footnote saying that this system should be aligned with an international system, but only if it's as ambitious or more ambitious than the EU system. And I think that will be difficult to do in an IMO setting, because you will have some countries, just not being interested in having an ambitious and high price of emissions. So I think we're going to have two systems in the future, but I think it's only going to be after 2027 or something similar.
Okay, interesting. So do you have any tips you want to give for any stakeholder in the industry about this regulation in your perspective?
Yeah, for me that would be, don't be scared of it. I mean, dive headfirst into it and learn from it, and then use it as your strategy. Because if you are bidding for cargoes as a ship owner, or if you are a cargo owner that wants to, reduce your scope 3 emissions, then this is actually a very, very good tool to have aligned incentives through the contractual chain. So actually use it as a mean of reducing the emissions and branding yourself on the green agenda, and also for the owners. I mean, if you have bought, I think it was last year, from the highest to the lowest price, and if you had bought all your emissions that day for a ship going, I think the example was from a tanker ship going from Rotterdam to New York and back to Low, I think that would actually have an impact of close to $3,000 a day on their daily rate cost when the EU ETS is fully phased in. So I mean, that's quite a competitive edge to have if you can have $3,000 a day cheaper EU allowances than your competitors. So really, I mean, they have to go into this market at one point, and that point is now. And why not be the best at it? Why not use it to your advantage? I mean, it would be the same to always have more expensive bunker in your tank when you're trading your vessel. That's just going to be something that won't give you a profit at the end of the year. So instead of being scared of it, use it to your advantage and use it as a strategic.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting what you say. You say that we can use this new regulation in a way that it can even increase our business profit, even make, because it's what Shipowner wants actually, to be straight to the point. So we can use this regulation to bring more business, to bring more opportunities.
For sure. It's with any other disruptive thing that's coming into an industry. I mean, if you're scared of it and trying to hide from it, then eventually it's gonna get you sooner or later. And this is a regulation. I mean, it's gonna get you sooner or later. There's no getting around it. So why not, be the best at it as soon as possible, and then use it to your advantage? Because there is no threat that isn't also an opportunity. And with this comes major opportunities for especially for ship owners.
Okay, thank you for all those informations, Stefan. Let's talk to make the last short part more talk about yourself. Why did you decide to work in this field of regulation, etc.?
Yeah, well, exactly, and that's back to the name, right? New Era Maritime Advisory. I really think with all these new regulations coming into play, the old way of doing business in the shipping industry and in the shipbrokering industry as a ship owner, I mean, those days are gone. And people probably haven't realized it yet, but those days are gone. We're in a new era now where you have to, think about these things. You have to calculate these things. You have to be active in the market to be able to to be able to get the best of it. And that's why I want to focus on this, because I really think it deserves more attention than just okay, but I can call my bunker supplier, then I can buy these allowances, and then I open an account, and then that's just it. I mean, I just think it needs to focus, and I think you need to be an expert to have that focus, because if you also have to fix your vessel and make sure that it gets out of the port in time, and calculate your demurrage, all that, this is just going to drown. I mean, it took me more than a week to fully read through the regulation, understanding it, laying it out there, making a mental map of what affects what, and what dynamics do we see from this. So you really have to focus on it, and I think I have spent that time, and I know from having been at shipping companies all my professional life, that time just isn't there. And that's why I want to focus on this, and helping business have that focus, and maybe just putting it in front of them. Okay, this is actually your possibilities, and here you can actually take a leap compared to your competitors.
Okay. So you are specifically you're specialized in every kind of regulation, only in EU or globally?
It's mainly the EU, but I can also help with the CII that's in place. I think that's what's of the main concern for everyone. But it's not only related to the ETS, it's also the Fuel EU coming up. How should you go about it with biofuel, or when should you make a switch to other fuels? There's also the CSRD, as I mentioned, the reporting. How do you automate, or I would really like to work with people on how to automate their data, and have that becoming an integral part of the cargo owners' data, and aligning their interest in reducing the emissions. And then if I can do that both for EU companies, but definitely also outside EU, I just think, since EU are the first mover, it makes sense to focus here.
Okay, very interesting. Do you want to add something for the end? Because now it's the end of the podcast. I think I asked you all the questions, but if you want to add something, it's the moment.
I think that for the students watching this, I mean, it's really a time where you can go out and be an expert in the beginning. I mean, I came out to a company expecting to learn, and I did learn a lot, but I quickly found out that I learned about something that nobody knew about. So it's really, when times are changing, it's really a time filled for also your personal ambitions that can come through. You can become an expert very, very quickly. So even though it's a conservative industry in many ways, having a new perspective, and bringing your ideals to a company, and bringing your interest into a company, I mean, you can really hit the ground running. So I would quite try to give that as a little speech to the students, seeing that you should really believe that you can go out and make a difference from day one in a business.
Very nice words. Yeah, for sure. That's very important what you say, that with all because maritime, or not only maritime industry, but nowadays we have so many challenges, more than before, on new regulation, but not only regulation. We have some opportunities, different projects. So it's quite easy to find a niche. I can say it's not easy to find a niche, but I mean, it's easy to get access to the niche, but you need to find the niche you like, by the way.
For sure, and the shipping,
needed.
Exactly, and the shipping industry has been known as quite a dinosaur industry in some aspect, right? I mean, it's all been a relationship business. I know this guy, this girl, and all that has been, the way of success. But those days are really, really over, and people are going to realize it at some point, and that's the opportunity, scope of opportunity for the new talents out there. So really go out and believe in yourself, and find a niche, at least that's what I would do, and then focus on that, and believe that you can actually make a difference, even if it's on making profits or having a green agenda. I mean, there is every sort of aspect out there that you can endorse in, and you can really take a company to a new level.
I completely agree. Yeah. Thank you, Stefan. It was a pleasure to having you. You helped a lot of people, I'm sure. We will have a lot of good feedback about this episode.
Great.
Thank you again, and I wish you, of course, all the best for 2024.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and watching this episode. We are looking forward to bring you more insights from maritime professionals, experts, and students. Do not hesitate to follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Your support means a lot to us and helps us to bring you more content.